It is Wednesday, June 23rd, 2020. I'm Pastor Thor Ramsey with Center Church. This is Gospel for Five, where we take 5 minutes out of our day and focus on the gospel and the one who saved our souls. So we've been focusing on this reality that you are now a child of God. You are a son or daughter, and God is now your Father. So let me read Galatians 4:4-7 again. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, then an heir through God. What happens when we forget who we are? We forget that we're sons and daughters and act like orphans. And what does that do to us? Well, in verse 15, Paul again asks, what then has become of your blessedness? For I testify to you that if possible, you would have gouged out your eyes and given them to me. When the Galatians moved away from the gospel, they lost their joy. They forgot who they were in Christ. And when we forget that we're sons and daughters adopted by God, we act like slaves. That they lost their joy, their blessedness. When you forget that you're a child of God, you lose your joy. But what else did they lose? Well, in their service before, Paul testifies that they would have done anything for him. Now, that is a mark of a joyful person, a person who wants to serve. Again, in verse 7, he says, so you are no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, then an heir through God. What does it mean to be an heir? J.I. Packer, in his book, Knowing God, says this: adoption is a family idea conceived in terms of love and viewing God as Father. In adoption, God takes us into his family and fellowship and establishes us as his children and heirs. Closeness, affection, and generosity are at the heart of the relationship. To be right with God the Judge is a great thing, but to be loved and cared for by God the Father is greater. He's really saying, in one sense, that forgiveness is not the greatest thing about redemption, but adoption is. You're not just forgiven because God was angry with you. You're forgiven because God wanted to adopt you. God wanted you as his child. He chose you. To be an heir means that there is a promised inheritance for the child. But are all our promises as Christians only promises of the great by and by, of the distant future that we will only know upon death, or the not so distant future, depending upon what God has in store for your life? But the answer is absolutely not. Are there no promises that we can claim now? The answer is absolutely yes. Children live by the promises of their Father. Now, I'm not speaking here of developing an entitlement attitude. Children with entitlement attitudes aren't pleasant children to be around. But children who live by the promises of their Father live in humble reliance upon him. It's humble because they know they're being blessed with everything they do not deserve. He who did not spare his own Son for you, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also along with him graciously give you all things, everything you need? Think of the story of the orphan in Oliver Twist. He lived like an orphan on the streets with other homeless orphans, but he was actually the child of very wealthy people. But he didn't know it. He didn't know who he was, and an enemy kept this fact from him. And when he discovered his true family, he was thankful because he knew what it was like to be orphan. Now, what has God said to you